Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Where is Business Travel Headed Next?, hosted by SAP Concur. I'm thrilled to have you all here as we explore the findings from our recently released 6th Annual Global Business Survey research. I'm Jason Grunin, and over the next 50 minutes, we'll uncover valuable insights gathered from 3,750 business travelers and 600 travel managers across 24 countries worldwide. Before we get into our content for today, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping tips. We want this session to be interactive, so please use the Q&A widget on the bottom of your screen to ask our presenters any questions. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout. Secondly, if you have any audio issues or can't see the webinar, please refresh your screen or browser window. That usually solves the problem. I also want to draw your attention to the survey at the bottom left of your console. Please do take a minute at the end of the webinar to give us feedback on today's session. This year's research dives deep into the challenges confronting business travelers today, including the profound impact of travel disruptions and the imperative of tighter budgets. Additionally, we shed light on the intricate role of travel managers, who navigate the delicate balance between employee needs and business objectives. Today's discussion isn't just about acknowledging these challenges. It's about uncovering the opportunities that they present for both travel managers and companies alike. By understanding these insights, we can pave the way for smarter strategies, enhanced traveler experiences, and more business practices. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our speakers who will be joining me as part of today's conversation. First, we have Nathan Richter, who is a senior partner at Wakefield Research, where he's a leading expert in developing thought leadership research for brands, including 50 of the Fortune 100 and nearly 100 countries. Nathan regularly appears in the media, including NPR, The Washington Post, Fortune, CNBC, among many others. Next, we have Chloe Carver, who is the head of corporate travel at Acquis Consulting Group. Her team works with companies of all sizes to build, scale, and optimize their travel and expense programs. They're focused on providing strategic transformation and advisory to help enable better traveler experience for both corporate clients and suppliers. And again, I'm Jason Grunin within the SAP Concur Value Experience Group. Our team assists customers by creating and delivering value-based engagements to help recognize opportunities for optimization, program growth, and end-to-end transformation. Prior to my time at SAP Concur, I managed travel and procurement and efficiency projects for a higher education institution. Again, please feel free to ask questions during the webinar today using the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to address them during our interactive discussion segment. Thank you once again for joining, and let's dive into our latest research findings on global business travel. To kick off our conversation today, we'll explore what the survey revealed related to today's business travel landscape and what it means for travel managers and travelers alike. Nathan, can you share some of the insights and highlights of those challenges?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason, for that kind introduction. Thank you to the entire Concur team for the invitation to appear here today. And thank you to our attendees who are taking valuable time out of their schedules. There is a heat wave out there, so perhaps they're enjoying the air conditioning too. But this is our 6th year conducting this global research for SAP Concur. And so we have a lot of insights to share. We have a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to do my best to do so quickly. But very briefly, I just want to remind folks of who we surveyed. Jason mentioned it a moment ago. But for this research, this is extremely high quality opinion data. We surveyed 3,750 business travelers in 24 markets, 24 countries. We surveyed 600 travel managers in 6 markets. So this is high quality, best in class data. And crucially for our conversation today, it's projectable to the larger population of business travelers globally and travel managers. So this is really great stuff. And we're just very pleased to be here presenting it to you today. Okay. let's talk data. And first, I think let's take a look at the business travel landscape. And from our perspective, it's important to really understand first the role that business travel plays in people's professional lives, because doing so provides context for the rest of our conversation. We're going to breathe some life and humanity into some pretty cold numbers here. So these are the stakes. For a large majority of business travelers, in this case, 67% globally, they feel that travel is critical or vital to their career. And for a moment, I just want you to pause on the word critical, because what that means is it's not a nice to have. It's not just something they like doing. It's not a free steak and a martini in the bar. Everyone loves that. But this is something that is essential for them to succeed in their professions. And we all know that that means it's essential for them to succeed in their lives, right? Our professions are very important to us. And so for 67%, business travel is essentially a career requirement. Of course, they also enjoy it. Even those who say it's not critical, amongst all business travelers, 76% say that they enjoy business travel. And so for everyone watching here today, let's just keep that in mind as we go through about looking at obstacles and challenges and some of the difficulties and some of the struggles that people are having, because they're having those struggles through the lens of something that's very, very important to them and to their doing well. And as you can see on the slide here, of course, these attitudes are consistent just the world over. So for anyone who's traveled this summer, in the last year or two, it is a touch striking that business travel is something that people continue to enjoy. As someone who travels a lot, I certainly have had my moments. Simply put, business travel has become more challenging. And even before the recent outages that stranded 500,000 passengers, 5,000 flights, there have been increasingly outages and delays for a variety of reasons. And these travel headaches, they're not going away, and they are expected to increase in frequency. And so overall, we find that 88% of business travelers already have been forced to change their plans due to problems such as travel delays. And these travelers, they're experiencing more than mere inconvenience. 38% have been forced to spend additional unplanned days on the road. 33% have endured long layovers. And as you may expect, as you yourselves have perhaps experienced, there's a cost to people, there's a cost to businesses when this happens. As regards businesses, more than a third, so 38%, have had to cancel or reschedule meetings. 36% have incurred additional travel expenses. And so there are disruptions, of course, on the home front too. And this is a cycle. These things are all related. So when business travelers are delayed or when they don't make it home on time, there's personal impacts that, of course, affect business that they're doing. And essentially, it leaves travelers scrambling in their personal and in their professional lives. So why do we mention this? Well, this is the root of a trend that we've been tracking around booking buffers. And booking buffers are how travelers tend to be responding to some of these challenges. And just for clarification, these are booking buffers are extra time added to the start or end of a trip so that travelers don't miss a meeting or event and basically stress about getting home. A huge majority of travelers globally, 86% overall, believe that this extra time is necessary because they expect interruptions when traveling. And so that's now the default expectation, and it's happening the world over. It's a universal experience. And I think that's why 80% are booking extra time for arrival, departure, or in some cases, both. 61% are booking extra time for arrival, 46% for departure, and 27% are doing both. And I think it's evidence that the cost of travel delays and cancellations, it compounds beyond the immediate costs associated with things like rebooking. When a system fails, when people no longer trust, they start looking for workarounds and they start looking for remedies. And these so-called solutions introduce inefficiency, they introduce risk, they introduce cost. And I think that's what you're seeing happen here. Against this backdrop of business travel becoming more difficult, we see that travelers are also facing challenges from within their own companies. Almost everyone, 91%, reports that their company has become less flexible about travel over the past year, and that these companies are making cuts. And these cuts largely fall into three categories. First is less allowance for personal flexibility. Second is reducing just the overall cost of business trips. And third, cutting back on non-essential trips. And I want to focus on the first two categories, starting with reductions to personal flexibility. And what we're talking about here are cuts to leisure travel. 27% have seen companies cut back on leisure travel. And for a quarter, their companies are no longer approving leisure travel at all, the addition of these kind of personal days onto business trips. This is a huge change. It's a huge trend because for most of us, leisure travel is, at least as coinable trends go, is probably the biggest travel trend generally of our lifetimes. You could argue that in-flight Wi-Fi, there's a good argument that in-flight Wi-Fi is bigger, but leisure travel is an enormous component of travel and crucially of people's expectations when they travel. It was true before the pandemic, certainly true after the pandemic. It's kind of business as usual. And so this is a turning point in that story, that less flexibility to balance work and life. The second group, reducing the costs of business trips, it's the largest. It includes things like no longer allowing people to stay overnight to avoid a day trip, 28% report that. Restrictions on paying more for nonstop flights, again, 28%. And nearly as many, 27%, report that they're being encouraged to use public transportation instead of more expensive taxis or ride shares. And Jason, so for context, this is a continuation of similar trends we've seen previously. In 2023, 40% experienced reduced travel budgets, 32% had a reduction in overnight trips. So there's these quality of life impacts, greater emphasis on lower fares and indirect routes, a tightening of allowances for business class or premium class travel. So in short, what we're seeing from the traveler perspective is a tough travel environment that's getting even a little tougher. Jason?
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, as I've experienced myself, travel is just such a personal experience and personal value. It's critical to business, it's critical to career advancement. And, putting my previous hat on as a travel manager, the desire to balance between company priorities and the traveler needs is such a delicate exercise. This year's survey results are pretty impacting and highlight the noticeable cuts in travel flexibility that grew in the recent year. It's interesting to see how this trend continues. If you look at even some of the news articles lately, there's been significant coverage of how critical business travel is for career development. So Chloe, maybe you can comment here. What do these survey findings mean to you based on your industry knowledge as well as what your client engagements are saying today?
Yeah, I love that we started with the good news about how majority of people think business travel is critical to their careers, but also that most are actually enjoying their business travel. I think the reality, as we've already talked about, kind of that face-to-face interaction and therefore travel are so key to so many industries and roles. For the travel managers and the suppliers listening in, I think it's safe to say we all want to enable those who have to travel for business to really enjoy their business trips. So it's nice to hear that positive sentiment around business travel kind of right off the top, that most people are enjoying their travel. As we've talked about the flexibility, I think the fact that 91% of travelers have seen a cut in flexibility, that was really the point that stood out to me in this first section. I think within the industry, we've definitely been talking about traveler well-being a lot, especially in the last year or so. So in my eyes, providing flexibility is an important component of traveler well-being. So for those on the road a lot, I think flexibility can help them feel like they have some more control and some choice with regard to their travel. And that type of peace of mind can really go a long way for those road warriors. I think the decrease in flexibility that we're seeing is really just kind of a result of how things have changed from the pandemic. I think a lot of travel programs got a bit looser during the pandemic. and even immediately following, just to make people feel more comfortable when they were traveling. I saw a lot of companies that started allowing business class on more occasions because for a little while, those airfares were a little bit less expensive and it was a little nerve-wracking to start traveling again. We saw a lot of companies revise their travel and expense policies, especially in 2020 and 2021. But now we're seeing companies revisit their policies again. The pendulum kind of went to one extreme right after the pandemic, and we're seeing it swing back to center a bit as companies start to tighten those travel purse strings a bit, and those cheaper business class fares are not really seen as much today. So these adjustments, I think, are why we're seeing that kind of overall feeling of there being less flexibility.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. Travel is definitely not what it used to be. Looking even from availability on a plane, every plane is completely full. As Nathan mentioned, some of the irregular operations and delays have a direct impact on travelers getting where they need to be and when. Having too strict or stringent of a policy creates an opportunity for your travelers to use the wrong channel to procure that travel, and that frustration that can happen during the expense reporting process. How are you supporting them? Are you dynamically adjusting your policy when they know that they need to do the right thing? Or how do they even know what the right thing to do is? Do you have the platform in place to educate your travelers and be dynamic enough to ensure that this decreased flexibility doesn't have a significant impact on your employee engagement, morale, budgets? I mean, Chloe, does that resonate? What are you seeing as a result of these impacts on decreased flexibility?
I think you've definitely hit the nail on the head with kind of what the problem is with decreasing flexibility in general. So I would caution against removing that flexibility wherever you can. I know that there's probably some executives or others that are telling you need to make changes within your policy, but leaving some element of flexibility can help you go a long way with garnering some positive traveler sentiment for your overall travel program. So if people can't fly when they want, or, as take the connecting flight, you're requiring them to take a connecting flight instead of a direct to save a little bit of money here and there, I think it's going to really negatively impact their perception of your travel program. So when you're looking at your policy, make sure that you're kind of figuring out where that balance is between doing what you need to do to appease the company, but also making it so that travelers still feel that flexibility. I think as well, when it comes to kind of the overall perception of the travel policy, to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, I think that perception of travel can actually show a perception of the company. So if you work for a company that you feel is, you're giving a lot of your time and your effort, you're constantly on the road, you're away from home, away from your children, and you don't feel like they're giving you that same courtesy of some flexibility, I think it's going to be more likely than not that employee may start to look for other forms of employment. So in today's business landscape, travel can really be a retention strategy for companies. So we need to look beyond that just immediate cost saving where we can. If we're running our road warriors into the ground, like I said, they're going to start looking for employment elsewhere. But if we show those frequent travelers that we're taking care of them, caring about their well-being, allowing them some flexibility, it really can be a difference maker in retaining that talent. Interestingly, I saw in the travel manager survey as well that actually the happiest travel managers are those who want to stay in their role, and 41% of those folks indicate that the employer is emphasizing meeting employees' demands for flexible travel options above cutting costs or sustainable travel. So we're really seeing that travel managers that are supported by companies that allow some flexibility, they're absolutely kind of the happiest in their roles, and it's actually making those travel managers' roles a bit easier overall.
Really good point, Chloe. It's interesting, kind of that decreased flexibility. It's not always about, as you inferred, it's not always about the cost, right? It's the benefits that potentially come with this managed program or having these direct channels. Look at some of the disruptions we've seen in the last couple of months with global impact, whether it be weather, technology, employee relations in Europe, staffing. They're not going away. And, how do travel managers, the question travel managers are asking is, how do we prepare our employees and our travelers to deal with these disruptions? And what kind of tools can be put in place to empower those employees during these what seem to be reoccurring frequent disruptions?
They are a bit frequent, and they can definitely be such a killer to experience. I think one of the things I've found with my corporate clients who are dealing with kind of negative sentiment and negative traveler satisfaction due to these disruptions is that it's really just all about managing the expectations, communicating with them, and just showing the travelers that you have the tools in place to support them when things go wrong. Most business travelers have been on some kind of delayed business trip before. Let's be honest, we all know delays can happen, but it's how those delays are handled and kind of how we feel supported that can really make such a difference. So I think recently, actually, I was working with a company that had TripIt enabled. And this is an interesting story because it's a situation where they had the tool, but for some reason, it just wasn't kind of getting out to the travelers. And TripIt can be such a great resource for travelers because, I've actually personally been in an airport and had a TripIt alert on my phone before it was even announced over the loudspeaker or anything. And I just sat back at the lounge and decided, okay, I don't need to go to the gate yet. So those seconds and minutes can really matter when you're already in the process of traveling. But the company I was working with, they actually said they were struggling with getting their travelers to use TripIt. And so I worked with them to come up with some change management techniques to make sure that the use of TripIt would be more widespread. So once more travelers started using it, we found there was even better word of mouth around it, which helped spread it more. But it really started with making sure they were hitting as many modes of communication as they could to remind travelers of the tools they had at their disposal. So they put something in the company notes in Concur. They added it to relevant intranet pages. They put it in monthly newsletters that were sent around. They even actually sent some targeted communications to frequent travelers to try to make sure they were hitting that population that would be most benefit from using TripIt. So this approach obviously isn't right for every company. I know some companies that would be horrified to know that many communications went out about it. So you do need to find what works well for your company culture. But in general, just making sure that travelers are aware of the tools that they have at their disposal can really help with that traveler sentiment during those disruptions.
Yeah, great point. And as a travel manager, I often found myself navigating this delicate balance between the sentiment and disruption management and the loud vocal travelers who seem to be knocking at my door every day. I remember a time when a major snowstorm grounded flights and left a significant number of people stranded and prevented them from getting to a 2-day conference. And, the initial response is, well, we'll just, go to the desk and sit on hold with the airline. And, those that use the managed travel program were already being proactively cared for, right? And by the end of this ordeal, those that, use the tools express the gratitude for being proactively assisted by the travel agency. And it's moments like these that highlight importance of empathy and efficiency in travel management, where you take a chaotic situation and it really tests the reliability of your program. And speaking of empathy, this job of a travel manager just requires quite a bit. And as we move into our next topic, caught in the middle seat, traveler versus company expectations, I think it's a great segue.
Great. Well, thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Jason. And Jason, you're right. I heard the phrase a few times of a delicate balance. It's a phrase I use myself. Looking at the research, what we really see is more of a brutal balance for travel managers, because they're managing these competing interests and expectations of companies and travelers, and they've been doing it for years under extremely challenging conditions. I talk a lot about this research. I talk a lot about this research outside and inside Concur, and my heart goes out to the travel managers for sure. Let's take a look at one aspect of that tension, if we may. We sort of previously discussed where companies are cutting back. So things like adding personal travel to a trip, direct flights, asking travelers to take public transportation. And there's just a ton of overlap between what companies are cutting back on and what employees need to feel comfortable on a business trip. And Chloe, you pointed your finger at this, and I agree. You really see a company through the lens of its travel policies. It's one of the reasons we love doing this research so much here at Wakefield. But when we look at the data, when we look at the trends, what we see is that travelers and businesses are on something of a collision course. And this is a little similar to some of the trends that you see outside of travel between the workforce and management and workforce and companies, that there are different expectations on both sides. And we're seeing a reorientation, a recalibration of those expectations. The combination of cost saving measures, a reduction in flexibility, what it means is that ultimately some travelers will resist or otherwise feel sort of negative sentiments towards their organization. And that's what we're seeing in the data. 92% of business travelers are willing to decline a trip under certain conditions. And these conditions are not rare. Let's look at the specifics a little bit, but we'll see the reasons for declining a trip essentially break down into two categories. They break down into safety and lack of flexibility. Now let's take safety first, because as our parents told us, safety first. Nearly half would refuse a business trip if they had safety concerns about the destination, and 44% feel that way. More than a third, 35%, would say no if they had political or social concerns about the destination. And 33% would decline a trip if they had safety concerns about the mode of transportation. Now, think of each of those items just in the context of today's headlines, and you can see that this is an issue that is ascendant. Moving over to the flexibility category, 27% would refuse a trip if they couldn't choose sustainable options or if the environmental impact of the trip were too high. We have been tracking that issue for Concur for many years and continues to be a pervasive one. Nearly as many, 24%, would say no if they can't make changes to the trip outside of company policy. So there's our lack of flexibility. And 22% would refuse if they weren't allowed to extend the trip for personal travel. Personally, as someone who's been traveling for a number of years now, that last stat, that 22% would refuse if they couldn't add personal travel, is striking. This is further evidence that this has become an expectation. And so the fact that business travelers are willing to refuse a trip for these reasons, it puts travel managers in a very hard place, because they want and need to support their travelers, but they also want and need to carry out the company's mission. It's almost an impossible situation. And let's, as a result, take a look at how this impacts travel managers directly, and specifically when it comes to the safety of the traveler, and how these factors make travel managers' jobs even more difficult. It's been making it difficult, and it makes it more difficult in the coming 12 months. And we see in this data, really, what we're seeing is company expectations just colliding with a lack of support for travel managers and regarding the safety of travelers themselves. So let's dive in. When you ask what factors, if any, will make their jobs more difficult in the next 12 months, 38% of travel managers cite managing increased safety issues amidst rising geopolitical tensions. They're mentioning this as a real concern. I suspect, were we to field this survey today, it would be even higher. There are other factors jeopardizing managers' abilities to protect travelers. For example, employees not using company tools to book or update their travel plans. 38% of travel managers report this as an issue. Last-minute changes, cancellations also pose a problem. And it's worth noting, particularly if business travelers are not using company booking tools. So essentially, travel managers can't fully satisfy their duty of care requirements at a time when it's almost been more important than ever, and without access to information. And despite this, 2 in 5 travel managers, 37%, say they're expected to support these duty of care obligations, but without the visibility into all travel that they need to do so. It must be very frustrating. While travel managers are expected to keep individual travelers safe, as I mentioned earlier, they're also expected to support broader company initiatives. So even when opening the aperture from a narrow focus on individual travelers to broader company policies, we see some of the same challenges. And specifically, let's take a look at a very complicated issue. Let's look at sustainable travel. Now, last year, 37% of travel managers expected a more challenging year due to a requirement that their company provide environmentally sustainable travel options. Great. This year, similarly, we see 39% expect even more difficulties in this area due to new or increasing sustainability regulations and requirements. And so travel managers are once again navigating sort of diverging company priorities when it comes to sustainable travel. We see this gap in company expectations. We see this gap in support provided to travel managers to meet these expectations. 36% feel that they're asked to provide more sustainable travel options, but without adequate budget to do so. Chloe mentioned a moment ago this idea of sort of cutting around the corners, and there is that old saw of being a penny wise and pound foolish. I think the data is a cautionary tale against such an approach. On the other hand, nearly as many here, 33%, believe their company's focus on sustainable travel has come at the expense of traveler flexibility or cutting costs. So this is another dimension, another facet to an already extremely tricky circumstance. As I said a moment ago, we know from our years of research that sustainability is a priority for a significant number of business travelers and travel managers. But what we have today is travel managers being caught between new regulations and companies not providing enough budget to adequately provide sustainable options for travelers. So they're stuck again between the company and the traveler. And Jason, I think that this stat sums up exactly what we've been discussing. 36% of travel managers anticipate even more challenges and feel they are balancing increasingly competing expectations of the traveler and company. So we have years of data showing the stress level these folks are feeling. Then what they're saying is it's even harder this year somehow. So Jason, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. The observations in the industry really support that desire and need that procurement and travel managers are recognizing. They need to plug these gaps and help from fulfilling the expectations of both the traveler and the company. And as the research shows, a lot of it is due to lack of tools, lack of budget, lack of policy, and really partnering with your buyers. So a lot of these solutions continue to integrate more content and booking platforms. Users are presented options from all kinds of transportation, both specific for rail and air. What's the most economical versus what's the most sustainability driven choice? Having a one-stop shop helps provide travelers those choices, but those booking tools also help organizations deploy a platform to ensure that it's all reportable and accessible, whether that be for sustainability emissions, whether that be for duty of care, for budget, etc. Programs have to continue to adapt and ensure that the market needs of both business and the traveler are represented in the booking and the expense side. And a program, policy, or platform should never really be a static or unchanging landscape. It's dynamic, and it should leverage the latest technology and advances to see it prosper. It requires constant nurturing, just like a gardener tending to their garden. And in that garden, a significant amount of that program growth or that growth really happens at go live, and the maturity continues to advance. So Chloe, switching to you for a moment, what have you seen in your recent engagements related to successful approaches to successfully manage current or future tensions between travelers and their companies?
I mean, it can be a really difficult space to be caught in between your travelers and your company. There are ways to use that tension to your advantage. I mean, one of the really staggering yet sadly unsurprising stats that I saw in the Travel Manager report is that nearly all travel managers, in fact, it was actually 99% of the respondents, said they experience a disconnect between the tasks their company expects them to perform and the tools, support, and budget provided, leaving them feeling like success is a challenge. So I think what you need to do in these instances is just try to become the advocate for your travelers to your senior leadership, while simultaneously trying to act as an informed voice of reason for your travelers to help communicate your company's priorities. So in doing so, you can actually become an advocate for yourself as well and make sure that you have the right tools to actually do your job how you're expected to. What I've found as a helpful tactic is to create a dialogue between travelers and your travel team. So often the best way to do this is to set up kind of different focus groups, if you will, and have regular touch points with these folks. So I definitely recommend creating a distinct group to gather feedback and brainstorm from. One recommended group would definitely be your frequent travelers. I think they bring an interesting perspective that you'll want to hear that feedback. Another really important group to talk with is your executive assistants, who often are booking on behalf of other travelers. So try to meet with them, ask what matters to them, what pain points are they feeling, where do they feel the program is failing short, and where do they feel like it's working. Even setting up just quarterly touch points with these different groups can make a huge difference in making them feel like they're a part of the program, and also enable you to actually do your job how you need to do your job to have happy travelers. Some structure is obviously needed in these focus groups so that it's a positive exercise rather than just being a kind of unproductive venting session. And one way to do this is to set expectations ahead of time and send some updates between sessions to let the travelers and the executive assistants know that you're actually putting things that you're hearing in these sessions into practice. I'm a firm believer that listening to travelers and providing a positive traveler experience for employees will make your job as a travel manager easier and more rewarding in the long run, because travel well-being is really important. It keeps those employees happy. It also enables them to do their job more effectively when they have to travel for work, and it keeps them a little bit more compliant if they know that the program really supports them.
It's a really good point, Chloe. You have to take that feedback and do something with it. Otherwise, the program kind of sits in this stagnant place that travelers felt unlistened to. So what about from the other perspective? Is it critical for travel managers to pass information upwards to leadership to support the organization's mission? Are you, as a travel or procurement individual, tracking and managing unused tickets, your average savings, sustainability KPIs? What kind of vendor discounts are you receiving? What's our preferred vendor adoption? Where's the upward communication? Chloe, you mentioned travel managers also have to communicate their company priorities. What are some strategies to do that?
Yeah, you're right, Jason. There needs to be a dialogue also between the travel team and the company execs or any type of departments that are putting any of these like sustainability requirements, cost-cutting measures, other guidelines in place. I mean, ideally, as a travel manager, you have at least some seat at the table during these types of discussions when these things are being determined. I obviously know that's not always possible depending on the corporate structure, but at a minimum, travel managers should have an opportunity to understand why these expectations are being put into place and be able to express how feasible implementing certain goals actually are. So in these situations, I think data is really your best friend. So let's imagine, as Nathan spoke about, your company has implemented a certain sustainability target for the travel program. Advocate for yourself, for your team, for your travelers, and your program overall, that you may need a partner, something like a Thrust Carbon or someone that can help you achieve this sustainability goal. Because if your company actually wants to implement a sustainable program, the reality is that flights may be more expensive. They may need to be more direct flights. There may need to be a particular route or a particular airline you're using that's a little bit more expensive, but is actually more sustainable. If companies aren't willing to spend more on these sustainable options, it's going to be very hard to hit those sustainability goals. So having some type of dialogue with your execs about what's realistic, what's needed to hit certain goals, and having that conversation sooner rather than later will really be helpful in the long run. I think, Jason, it really shows that how a travel manager is involved in both this kind of tactical and strategic work as they manage programs. It's a lot to manage.
Yeah, you're right, Chloe. These topics can be both, transactional or transformational. The implications are not as simple as working from anywhere. They're now compliance and regulatory themes that impact company tax obligations, for example. As we look at our third topic, we're going to explore the tactical versus strategic value of how to manage your program. Back to you, Nathan. Can you share some of the findings from this section?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So for our part, one of the things we looked at was the impact actually on travel managers feeling stressed. When we asked them sort of what they're expecting for the year ahead, 99% expect a more challenging year ahead. And so that is not terribly surprising. What is surprising is it's a continuation of a year's long trend on the heels of already very difficult situations. So part of the issue here is that travel managers feel that they lack proper support. More than a third, 34%, are charged with demonstrating ROI yet they don't have the data that they need to do so. One of the probably best examples of why this mix of additional pressure and underappreciation exists is that a third, 33%, are expected to take on a more strategic role in the company without additional training or education. So without any extra support. And that's something that you can imagine being tasked with something but not being given the opportunity to develop the skills needed to accomplish it is extremely challenging for folks. It's extremely frustrating. So travel managers, many report, essentially being left to figure things out on their own. We do see some unfortunate consequences of this situation. So travel managers essentially ready to take a trip of their own, if you will. They are potentially looking to exit their companies and exit their current positions. 41% of travel managers globally, in fact, say that they intend to search for a new position this year. Now, whether they will or not, who knows? But what it reveals is an extraordinarily high level of dissatisfaction. 21% are going to look for a travel manager position at a different company, and 20% are attempting just to leave the profession altogether. So a sign of that difficulty. About a third, 35%, will remain in their positions without any changes, and they're apparently either quite happy to do so. So again, whether everybody does that really isn't the point. It's a sign of dissatisfaction and the probable result of working in a challenging role for many years. There is a bright spot here, and it's something of a North Star for companies looking to buck this trend. The companies most likely to retain their travel managers are actually the ones who are prioritizing their travelers. So let me say that again, because that is really hard to implement and really important to hear. Travel managers are happiest when they feel they are serving travelers well. And that is very important. 41% of these happy travel managers, the ones that will not be looking for new roles, indicate that their employers are focused on accommodating travelers over things like cutting costs. So that is far less true amongst those companies that are more focused on cutting costs. And so what we see in the data is travel managers saying, give me the training I need, give me the tools I need, and I will work wonders for you. Meeting travelers' needs helps retain travel managers. It's good for travelers, it's good for managers, it's good for companies. Jason?
Great point. That's really the key. All of those things, a happy travel manager really does drive organization bottom line savings when you're looking at the strategic things rather than the tactical. So I would ask you, the travel managers listening, how do you level up and look at the strategy behind how your program runs? Are you asking questions of your team, of your peers, of your working groups? How do we change and challenge the status quo? What are we doing today, and does it have to be done the same way tomorrow? Transformational organizations are using progressive, people-first travel management practices to adapt and mold their program. They're listening to their employees, as Chloe mentioned, and taking actions. Actions like taking steps to remove role bias from policy, updating meal allowance amounts, incorporating comprehensive duty of care programs. Speaking of that role bias, one of the things that was predominantly present for a long time is, well, you could only fly business class if you were this grade or higher, right? Well, that role bias, what changes? In the companies we've worked with and partnered with, there's been a lot of conversation of what makes an individual more deserving of a premium economy seat for an 8-hour flight, right? Are you listening to what your employees are saying? And Chloe, perhaps you can share from your engagements. Are you asking questions to stakeholders like, how are you being strategic on how they're spending your time? What kind of manual actions or processes are you spending most of your day? And are there ways to automate those steps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the engagements that are around trying to make the program run more smoothly, those are exactly the type of questions we need to ask. Typically I start with trying to understand the goals of the program to help kind of frame how a traveler manager can turn from a tactical role to a more strategic role. In general, I don't think most travel managers want to be kind of like a travel admin or the travel police, where you're solely kind of working on these tactical manual tasks and monitoring travelers day and night for compliance. So there are some small steps that you can be taking to start trying to set more strategic goals for the program and tracking against those goals to establish yourself as more of a strategic travel manager. One really impactful way to do this is to align your program goals to the larger company goals and values that you're hearing your executives talk about. So this will show that you're thinking about how the travel program fits within the larger company, and also shows you are kind of a strategic thinker in what you're trying to do. So if you're hearing about your execs wanting to increase employee satisfaction and drive retention, create some strategic goals for the travel program around increasing traveler positive feedback and just making sure that your travelers are happy. You can then bring that to executives and show that you're kind of aligning with what they're trying to do. If you aren't already, I'd also encourage you to try to find maybe 2 hours if you can. I know that weeks get really busy, but 2 to 3 hours a week to work on your data analytics strategy. This time it feels like a lot, but in the long run will be helpful, because arming yourself with data about your program can help you identify some trends, cost-saving opportunities, and other areas for improvement that will, again, take you into more of a strategic position. So presenting these insights to stakeholders and showing that you're making data-driven decisions about the travel program can go a long way with kind of how your role can evolve. You also want to stay up to date with industry trends. So, I commend everyone for attending the webinar today and making sure you're aware of what research is out there to stay aware of what's happening in the industry. I think we can also acknowledge that for some, the tactical components of running a travel program are exactly what they want to be doing, and they're not necessarily always looking for a more strategic role. So especially until we have more technology that we can use to automate these tasks, the reality is if there's some manual tactical work that you enjoy, it's okay if you want to keep doing that. For those who do want to become a more strategic role, I think we also need to acknowledge that, as we saw in the travel manager survey, it was reported that 1/3 of travel managers have been asked to actually take on a more strategic role, but they have not been provided with any additional training or education. So if you fall into this category and you want to transform your role, but you feel like you need training, definitely encourage you to try to think about the types of training or education that would be helpful for you, and try to advocate for yourself to get that training to be able to transform your role. So it can definitely take a significant time and effort to move into a more strategic role, but if you'd like to move from more tactical to strategic, you definitely can do it with some effort.
Speaking of transformational and time consuming, how much time do you put a value on how much time your travelers are spending trying to book, organize logistics? As the study suggested, an overwhelming majority of travelers have identified at least one area where they'd consider using AI-powered automation during the booking process to save time. Nathan, what else are travelers saying about taking an AI leap?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And I think we've set a record in business circles for not mentioning AI immediately. So good on us. But we did some exploration here. And what we did is we first took a look at how business travelers and travel managers perceive AI, and then what concerns they may have. Because, as you know, the genie's out of the bottle on this one. AI is already impacting the travel industry and travel management. And so the key here is understanding how travelers and managers are viewing these changes so that we can inform how these technologies will be used in the future. And there's really two big takeaways, and I kind of love this. First, nearly all business travelers are open to using AI. That's 95%. That's a big number. And second, just very few are comfortable using it right now, 7%, and that's a very small number. So how do we bridge this gap from interest to use, right? Based on where things stand today, part of the answer is the vast majority of travelers want their company to provide some support before they're comfortable using AI. So that's 89% say that. And so let's take a closer look at that. Once again, we have two themes, sort of two areas they want help with. First, research. Second, administrative support. Both offer ways to save travelers time. And as I think it's been pointed out here earlier today, there's financial value to that time. In terms of having AI do research for them, they'd like assistance when it comes to guidance on well-being and safety and on finding sustainable travel options. We have 37% reporting against both of those items. They're also looking for help with shopping options or booking. That's 35%. And they want recommendations for when, it seems inevitably, a flight gets canceled or travelers need to rebook. So they want AI to save them time, by identifying and curating information for them, which is great, something AI is very good at. When it comes to administrative help, business travelers are interested in visa and documentation report, capturing and reporting expenses. Both of those capture 37% of respondents, as well as helping to comply with their organization's travel policy. 35% feel that way. So here we see some common headaches for travelers that they think AI and they want AI to help ease that part of the process. So the desire is there, realistic use cases are there. And so how do companies bridge that gap? And it comes down once again to support. What we saw in the research is that travelers want assurances that their data will be protected and that the tools won't create any bias. That tracks. Those are major themes around AI in any sector. But on a more tactical level, they want their company to provide training on how to use it. And so as companies roll out this new technology, the data shows that travelers are interested if the company can support them. Jason? We may have an audio issue here, so give Jason a second. Hopefully folks can still hear me. I know we have a few minutes left here. Jason, just speak up when your audio is back. But I know I'm often asked when presenting this research, sort of, what are some of the surprising things that we see? And to me, there's so much to dig into there. But for me, from a trend perspective, it's not just one statistic. It's really opening the aperture to look essentially tonally at some of the tension behind these stats. Business travel is a great lens through which to view a company and to view business in general. And when you do that, what you see are changing expectations and the tension that comes from those changing expectations. So you folks out there who are traveling, who are managing travel, who are looking at the expense side of things, you are in a very difficult position because you are working in, as we like to say, very exciting times. Companies are tightening policies. There's reduced trust. There's cutting costs. There's less accommodation for travelers need, all against a backdrop of a perception that service is declining amongst travel providers. So very, very difficult. Jason, how's your audio?
Yeah, I should be back,
right.
Hopefully. Yes, thanks, Nathan. Gotta love good technology.
And we almost made it, man.
That first step, you mentioned several great points, right? But I think the first thing I would leave many of you with is, are you able to identify your objectives, right? What are your goals with AI? How would you use it to benefit your travelers? Is it helping benefit your users? And also exploring things like digital adoption tools and really putting things in place to help onboarding automation with real-time policy enforcement, real-time assistance for users that are needing help and direction on what to do. And Chloe, I think we all want to take advantage of things like ChatGPT and AI-infused tools, but what are you seeing from your clients about implementing those tools in the real world?
Yeah, it's definitely top of mind for many clients. And personally, I'm really excited to see many clients actually looking to implement AI and other technology in their programs, because there's really no doubt in my mind that AI is going to transform how we do work in our industry. I think right now I'm seeing a lot of clients interested in implementing some of that AI, exactly what you're mentioning with Jason, just kind of those traveler facing things to help travelers and how they're booking and actually going on their business trips. And anything they can do to make that booking and expensing traveler easier is definitely a priority. So for most of my clients, though, I feel like we're definitely in the early stages of determining their AI strategy. And like you mentioned, it really does start with thinking about the objectives and use cases for AI. So there's tools like WalkMe that can be used to help your travelers navigate the booking and expense process. There's predictive analytics tools that can be used to help you forecast your travel spend. There's also tools for carbon tracking. So there's a lot to look at. And I think before you go spend thousands of dollars on new technologies, make sure you've first identified what you're actually trying to do by implementing that AI and that new technology. I think when you look at kind of if you're trying to improve traveler satisfaction, reduce costs, increase your operational efficiency, whatever it is, once you set those objectives, you can then look at your use cases and make sure that from there you'll actually be able to identify the AI tools that are actually a good fit for your program.
Thanks, Chloe. Those are some really great points. I know we're coming to the end of our webinar, and however, I do see a couple questions. So I've got one that I'd like to read to the audience and ask, and it read, how would you recommend I go about getting budget to support tools for enhanced AI? It's a really good question. And what I would say is, we're finding organizations may have separate budgets for tools. Are you checking with all your stakeholders, other business partners within your organization, to see if budget may be available for automation? Thinking about time. What do you associate with manual tasks? If you can put a financial value on how many hours you're saving your employees and shifting from tactical to strategic, you may be able to build a business case to get budget to support AI. Chloe, maybe you have a couple of things to add to that.
Yeah, I think that you hit it right on the head there. Like, I think what's interesting is that some of these AI tools even leverage that type of data in their sales material. So if you can communicate out that time and cost savings, it can definitely be easier to get support for these type of tools. And think of tools like predictive analytics around flights, right? If you show that implementing these tools will help lower your air spend, in essence, the tool is paying for itself. So that can be a really helpful way to go about trying to get more support for these types of tools, even though they are a large investment in the front.
Thanks, Chloe. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time today for Q&A, but I'd like to leave you all with this. Be a lever for change. Take some of the statistics you've learned today on how you can help shape organizational policy. For the second year in a row, more than 2/3 of business travelers felt that business traveler was critical for career advancement, but more than 6% of them felt they had equal opportunity to take those trips compared to their colleagues. The majority felt it was either tied to seniority, age, appearance, gender, accent, etc. Ensure you're asking your leaders and sharing this concern within your own organization. Is there a path to change the status quo? We're now at the end of today's webinar. I want to thank our audience for attending, as well as our speakers, Nathan and Chloe. We hope that today's webinar has shed some light on the evolving landscape of business travel, providing valuable insights and into the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The latest research findings from the 6th Annual Global Business Travel Surveys are available to you in 3 reports: Business Travelers, SMB Travelers, and Travel Manager reports. To read the full reports, please click on the links provided. I also wanted to point out the survey again, which is located in the bottom left of your console. Please do take a minute and give us some feedback. Thank you for joining today.